Good evening. My name is Sean Langdon. I'm in Springfield, Oregon, and I serve as a full-time invitation support and youth minister for Community of Christ in the Greater Pacific Northwest USA Mission Center. The Greater Pacific Northwest USA Mission Center, which sponsors this event tonight, is the jurisdiction that serves most Community of Christ congregations in Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. Whether you are here from this area or are joining us from beyond, we welcome you and are glad to have you present as we engage in this important conversation. Tonight we are here for Lead Us into the Light, a racial justice conversation. The first of a few events we have planned for Lift Every Voice and Sing Racial Justice Week 2021. At the close of our evening, I will share some more information about the other events that we have planned for this week. Tonight, the public chat function is turned off and everyone will remain muted unless you are a presenter, though there will be a time for Q&A and we will explain how that will work later on at the beginning of the actual conversation. I want to share some introductions at this time. Those participating in the panel conversation will be Mary Dell Williams, Jenny Jackson, Nancy Ross, and Harold Lasley. That conversation will be moderated by Ron Harmon, who will also share some thoughts towards the end of our gathering. Also participating this evening will be some remarks, and then later on a prayer from Kim Naton, our Greater Pacific Northwest USA Mission Center president, as well as Dean White leading a spiritual practice. Damon St. Thomas, Teona Haley, and Daryl Collins will share from their personal experience in a Storytellers moment. And finally, Seclinda Pointer will be providing some special ministry music this evening. Thanks to all of you who are participating and being vulnerable with us tonight. When the horrific killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and others who are Black in America happened last year, I joined with others by participating in the Black Lives Matter protest here in Oregon. I imagine that several of you did where you are as well. Though this was the news headline for a while, this certainly wasn't an isolated event. No, it yet again served as a reminder of a much bigger and deeper issue of a history unnecessarily stained by the blood and ongoing oppression of the Black experience in the unfolding story that is the United States of America. As a faith community, we needed to find ways to respond, not just globally, not just nationally, but locally in the areas that we live and serve as well. That is our calling as disciples who follow the teachings of Jesus Christ when there is injustice in the world. And for too long, those of us with privilege because of the color of our skin have mourned and then moved on to the next thing that captured our attention in the headlines. We initially talked about this panel conversation early last summer, but decided that it was best served when the headlines faded, because we cannot let this become just a memory. In a statement made on June 1st, 2020, the USA Apostles for Community of Christ shared the following. Our commitment to addressing racial injustice must not fade with media coverage or languish in partisan political divide as we move into the next crisis. It is an ongoing struggle. We are far from realizing the dream expressed in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., who wrote, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." The Greater Pacific Northwest USA Mission Center is sponsoring this week because as media coverage fades, there is still much work for us to do. So my hope for tonight is that you be fully present to what is shared this evening and during our other events this week, if you're participating in those, because we have much work to do. And folks, I know that will, for many of us, because of our limited experience, that may make us uncomfortable, be uncomfortable. But first, join me in listening. We need to listen. Thank you. And again, welcome.
Good evening. I'm Kim Naton, and I live in Chehalis, Washington. I'll add my welcome to all of you as well, especially those from outside the geography of our mission center, as well as those who are here tonight who are not affiliated with Community of Christ. As Sean mentioned, this event has been on our minds and in planning for many months, and it's really exciting for us to see so many of you here tonight. Like many of you, I watched and listened to the events of last spring with sadness, shock, disappointment, and yes, anger. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd became the latest of familiar names added to a much too long list of others before them. But I watched and listened to the outrage, the protests, and the cries for justice from the relative safety and comfort of my cocoon of privilege. I quickly became aware of just how much I didn't and still don't know about systemic racism, white privilege, and a significant chunk of US history. In discussions I was having with my friends and colleagues, as well as on various social media platforms, the conversation turned to how those of us who claim to follow Jesus, the peaceful one, especially those of us in leadership roles, could or should engage. Our decision to hold this panel discussion now, rather than at the height of the protests, the riots, and the media attention, gave us the opportunity to step back, to learn more, to enter into this dialogue carefully and not as a knee-jerk response to a current event. Racial justice, but it is neither a brand new conversation nor an easily resolved one. It is one that requires humility, introspection, honesty, and vulnerability. It also takes commitment and time. And that is what we hope to offer those willing to participate and engage, not only in the events of this week, but as an ongoing effort to address racial justice through the lens of discipleship. We can no longer afford the luxury of complacency nor the arrogance of complicity, and we hope that the events of this week, as well as future opportunities, will provide an opportunity for each of us to grow in our understanding of Christ's mission, as articulated in Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Welcome.
I'd like to invite you now to engage in a spiritual practice and preparation for our evening together. Figuratively imagining the process of opening a window is a spiritual practice that can prepare us to open our minds to new ideas and experiences. So as we prepare for our time tonight, I'd like to lead you through that spiritual practice now. Settle yourself into a comfortable position where you're sitting. Feet on the floor, sitting straight, hands and arms relaxed on your lap. Close your eyes. Join me in taking 3 slow, deep breaths, letting them out slowly as you begin to relax. Draw your breath in deeply and let it all out. And yet a third time. Breathe in, breathe out. Imagine you are sitting in a room with comfortable and familiar furnishings, including the chair on which you're sitting. The walls have familiar pictures and other memorabilia from the periods of your life. Dwell for a moment in the comfort and familiarity of this room. Now notice there are windows on 2 walls framed by curtains. They are gray with dust and soot and grime, so that the daylight outside is filtered into a gray, soft light in the room. Shift your attention to sounds reaching into the room from beyond the windows. You notice the muffled sounds of a busy and bustling city. What do you hear? What do you imagine beyond those walls and those windows? What awaits you to experience? Imagine pushing yourself up out of your chair and walking to the window on the farthest wall. Notice the brass sash lock on the top of the bottom window sash, holding the window closed. Reach out and turn the lock to open it. Then reach down and slide the bottom sash up with the handles attached to the window frame till the window is open in front of you. Imagine the cool, fresh air blowing in past you, tickling your face and rustling your hair and clothing. Open your mind's eye and look at the scene in front of you. Imagine you are looking out from a window of a tall building, gazing down at the streets of the city with all its complexities of movement, sound, color, and diversity. Notice the brilliant colors illuminated by the bright light of the sun shining from above. Listen to the sounds that are now more crisp and clear and precise, and more loud and clashing and competing to be heard. How will you experience this city as you leave the comfort of your familiar surroundings? Will you encounter situations that excite and energize you? Will you be fearful of venturing into unfamiliar spaces? How will you prepare yourself to embrace and learn from all you encounter? From the Gospel of Buddha, learn to distinguish between self and truth. Self is the cause of selfishness and the source of evil. Truth cleaves to no self. It is universal and leads to justice and righteousness. Self, that which seems to those who love their self as their being, is not the eternal, the everlasting, the imperishable. Seek not self, but seek the truth. If we liberate our souls from our petty selves, wish no ill to others, and become clear as a crystal diamond, reflecting the light of truth, what a radiant picture. It will appear in us, mirroring things as they are, without the admixture of burning desires, without the distortion of erroneous illusion, without the agitation of clinging and unrest. Take a deep cleansing breath and open your eyes. Thank you.
Being Black in America means you learn to code switch in a sense, and whether that's at school, in your neighborhood, with friends you grew up with, or even at church. You learn to portray different sides of yourself in order to put yourself in the most advantageous positions to keep yourself safe and to keep others at ease. So to not get too far away from the main question, there are certainly a plethora of times where I can keenly remember, either at the time or certainly now as an adult, in reflection of how my experience was different from that of my peers because of my race or of my culture. And I'll try to split the question and give a couple examples, as this you'll be viewing this in a church forum. So there are certainly instances in church where, being Black was something I was oblivious to. I just kind of assumed that, as the Christian theology would tell you, we are all one in Christ, we're all the same, etc. But as a child, as a teenager going to spec, there's certainly a stigma that comes with being a kid from a predominantly Black community of Christ Church, or being the few minority members of your delegation at spec and in a non-international year as spec as a whole. An example that comes to mind in church was a few years ago at spec when I was staff, in my delegation, in not only viewing firsthand the situation of a camper being targeted by a staff member for the way he was acting, for things that are culturally, historically Black, but stepping into that line of fire to do what I felt was right to protect that camper also put me in the situation of understanding that color and where you come from truly mattering. In everyday life growing up in Baltimore, you get used to spending time with your friends at the basketball court or at home and being targeted by police just for existing. I think in the mind of a Black man in America, you have to learn to see yourself the way other people do, for right or wrong. So when driving, when walking down the street, in any sort of way you are presenting yourself, it is understanding that, unfortunately, in the eyes of so many, you are inherently dangerous, inherently aggressive. And so whether it's being pulled over, walking in a predominantly white neighborhood, being Black means being aware of your surroundings.
Hi, my name is Tiana Haley. I'm living in Salem now, but I'm originally from the Portland congregation. And today I'm going to be sharing my response to the question, how have you been treated differently because of your race? For me, the biggest one is being excluded. I've gone to a majority white high school for pretty much all my life. And what staff will do is, when choosing kids for classes, they'll try to take the people of color and spread them out through the classes so that each class has one or two people of color. So any colored friends that I have, I am never in the same classes as them, and I'm always the one Black kid in the class. And it's definitely awkward and weird, especially when we have to get separated for a group project or something in class. I'm pretty much always the odd one out, before Corona and everything, but that sucked. I remember having one class maybe where I would be able to see my friends of color, and I'd always be really excited to see them, but then we would get told by teachers that we were being too loud or being too excited, but it's only because we hadn't been able to see each other all day because we'd been in separate classes with a bunch of mostly white people that we didn't know. So That's been the hardest thing for me throughout high school is exclusion, and that's just one example that I thought of at the top of my head, but it's not nearly like as many examples as I have. I have a lot more. So, yeah, I think that's how I feel. I'm treated differently.
Hi, I'm Daryl Collins. I've been asked to share with you an incident that happened to me in 2018. I was working in Helena, Montana for a Canadian company called Graymont. They were doing a processing plant for Portland cement. Went into this restaurant to grab the evening meal, and upon entering the restaurant, I sat at the counter, which was fairly good size. I think the restaurant was somewhere around, maybe 15, 20 tables. And a group of people were in there, and I noticed to my left there was a table of about 5 men that was off to that side. And I went on up, looked at the menu that was already placed on the bar, but I waited probably 15 minutes before the young lady would come over and serve me, which seemed like an eternity. But during that time, I felt, how you get the eyes on the back of your head. Well, this was more than eyes on the back of my head. These were mumbles and rumbles coming from their voices, low, but yet I heard few words that were, grabbing my attention. By this time, the young lady is over here, and I'm getting the order ready, and she's taking it and puts it back in the kitchen to get ready, and then I start hearing louder voices as I'm waiting for my order. And the first one was, "Nigger, why you here?" And as I turned to look, then the next voice came across, "You shouldn't be in here." Now I know at this point I'm nervous, I'm scared. No one else in the restaurant has said anything. And these 5 white men are starting to get loud. And I almost just wanted to walk out without any food. But I said, well, maybe I'll wait a couple more minutes. Well, it turned out that it did not come out as fast as I wanted it to. So I left a $20 bill to pay for the food, and I started walking out towards the door. And behind me, they started to follow me. And as each step I took, the words became more vulgar, loud, and I started getting called everything but a child of God, to tell you the truth. And it became across to me as the most uncomfortable situation I've been in. And I've been around working in this industry and traveling to a lot of states in my career. And now it seems like I've run into the epitome of racism. And it became so bad that I got so scared that upon exiting the restaurant, and they're right behind me, I couldn't even find my keys. I was shaking so bad. I just was rattling. I got to the car close, and I dropped my keys, and then a prolific of words just started to hit me. And everything from nigger, don't ever come back here, boy, if you do, I'll make sure that you leave out of here in a body bag. It was just scary. I was shaking really bad. But exiting, I got in the car, told the guys I just want to leave without any incidents and get out of my way, I'm leaving. And I pulled out of the driveway without my food and being close to what I felt like I was going to be beat up really bad and not being able to even drive out of the restaurant. So it just tells me that during this time of the era that we're in now and who we have as leaders, and when they start allowing that type of rhetoric to happen from their sense or their top of their podium, it makes it hard for those of color to survive and to be treated with some sense of dignity in this world. And it's got to stop at some point in time. And that's the challenge that we all face. And I hope that we can achieve that at some point. Have a good evening.
Hello, I'm Ron Harmon from Independence, Missouri, and I am serving as your friendly moderator this evening. I am so grateful for the expertise and life experience of Mary and Jenny, Harold, and Nancy. We have selected 5 questions, recognizing that we are only just beginning the conversation this evening. Any one of these 5 questions could absorb the entire time we have available this evening. We may not get to all these questions, but I'm going to do my best as moderator to try to move us through the conversation. At the end of our time this evening, there'll be about 15 minutes where you will have an opportunity to ask our panelists some of your questions. As you have questions during the discussion, I would invite you to send your questions to Brenda Sargent in the chat. Again, send those to Brenda Sargent in the chat. And if you want to direct your question to a specific individual, please also indicate that along with your question. So with that, let's jump in with our first question and see if we can establish a working definition for racism. We're going to begin with you, Mary. What's your working definition of racism?
Well, I mean, I'm drawing from a couple different sources, but generally the way I understand racism is the channeling of power and privilege away from Black and brown people and towards the dominant culture or towards whites. And I kind of waver back and forth on whether Black and brown people can be racist, which me and my son differ on that. I tend to believe Black people can't really be racist, but I do think that we can be biased or discriminate towards people. But mostly I say no because we don't have the power generally, except in, well, currently rare instances, to really deny someone else of power and privilege. And like I said, it's kind of an evolving definition for me. I've been very active in the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, and that's part of their teachings, as well as the National Coalition Building Institute.
All right, Mary. I guess it's my turn. I'm Jenny. I'm from Kansas City, and I'm glad to be here to share with everyone tonight. It's also my fiance's birthday, so that's why I'm all cozied up in my bedroom. So my working definition of racism, which as Mary said, it's changing and evolving as life experiences and watching other people share more life experiences is always changing. But in a nutshell, so racism is the act of hating someone solely based on the individual's racial makeup, founded on ignorance of perspective, self, and basic humanity. It is harmful to everyone it touches. Individuals who are racist are harming themselves and denying themselves to live the life that Christ wants us to. But obviously they're not harming themselves nearly as much as they are harming those that they have a prejudice against. So it's harmful to humanity as a whole.
I'm Nancy Ross. I am from St. George, Utah. Both Mary and Jenny have talked about power and privilege, which are important, I think, in a definition of racism. I also like to think of racism as a system that privileges white people over people of color, and racism as when we engage in actions that reinforce or perpetuate that hierarchy, that kind of racial hierarchy.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Harold Lasley speaking to you from Hillsboro, Oregon. And like Nancy, I like to think of racism as a system as well. None of us made that system up. You didn't make it up. I didn't make it up. We were born into it. It's been around a long time before any of us arrived on the scene. And it's kind of become like any other system, like a legal system, system of government, the education system that we've been educated in. It's a system. And so I don't think we need to feel guilty about that system. We didn't make it up, but we should understand it continues to erode the worth and the dignity and aspirations of a whole lot of people. And so it demands and deserves our attention. So with that system idea in mind, I borrowed a definition from this book, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Kendi X. Embry, or Ibram X. Kendi, said that backwards. And this is definition that he states in the book. Racism is a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to racial inequity and are substantiated by racist ideas. Now, I hope all of you can see that. I like that definition. I'm kind of drawn to it for a couple of reasons. One, it's fairly simple and doesn't have a lot of big words. And he does go into a lot more detail in breaking that definition down. But it also offers, I think, a kind of a formula for the major components and outcomes of racism. And because I have an engineering background, I'm a retired civil engineer. This is kind of the way I put that together. Racist ideas plus racist policies equals racial inequity. So that's kind of a simple way to think about it, but it's also resonates very deeply with my experience, which I will get into more as we go through the questions. But one other thing, just to give you a quick example of how this might work. A racist idea would be white people manage money better, they're smarter at it than Black people, Native Americans, put whatever racial group you want to put in there. That's a racist idea. That idea gets worked into policies to make it easier for white people to borrow money, get lower interest rates, and make big purchases like home purchases. So you have a racist idea that filters into policies and patterns and practices. That produces racial inequities, such as currently exist in home ownership, which is 73% for white Americans, 51% for Native Americans, 48% for Hispanic and Latinos, and 42% for Black Americans, a gap of 31%. There is a large number of measures across socioeconomic measures that show gaps like this that are hallmarks of the system of racism. So I will stop there and I guess give the question back to the moderator.
Thank you, Harold and panelists. There's probably no more impactful way to go a little deeper into this and perhaps to bring it to life than personal experience. I'm going to ask Jenny if maybe she would get us started, or Nancy, I'm sorry. No, Jenny. I'm going to go with Jenny.
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, Ron.
With our next question, when have you experienced or engaged in racism? So this is kind of an opportunity for you, each of you, to reflect a little bit on how some of the concepts that you just talked about have found expression in some of your own experience. When have you experienced or engaged in racism?
My heart's already pounding. So I am unfortunately fortunate. The fact that I would have to consider myself fortunate to not have been physically had any physical altercations, simply because I'm Black. But I do have a list. Everything from just trying to enjoy a tractor pull with my white fiance and all of his white friends, and have complete strangers yell "Black Lives Don't Matter" at me. And we all decided to leave because obviously that wasn't the best place to be. Or I've waited tables at a restaurant owned by my best friend and her mother, and had tables completely deny my service, pull a manager aside to say, we need a different server. And I mean, that's happened more times than I can even tell you the stories. But the first time that it happened is always the one that I picture. Going to a new boyfriend's family Thanksgiving to meet his family, and have his grandma say, nobody told me she was going to be Black. Like, they sprung it on her because, surprise, he's dating a Black woman. Don't worry, that's not who I'm marrying. Or being followed through a gas station. I walked into a gas station in rural Kansas around 9 p.m., just looking for a snack for my long drive home from work, and had there were two people behind the counter, but one decided that they needed to follow me from one aisle to the next. Obviously, I just decided I didn't need the snack, and I would make it home fine. Or being pulled over on my way to work because I looked suspicious, and finding myself in handcuffs. Luckily, my boss was also my best friend and was okay with me being late to work because I looked suspicious. Countless. And I mean, these are just over the last couple of years. I didn't even go back more than 5 years. It's just the way things are. Constantly thinking, should I visit that part of rural America? Or am I safer because I'm bringing a white man with me? Actually, that's not a question. I 100% am safer because I'm bringing a white man with me. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you for sharing that, Jenny. So, as a white woman, I have been complicit in a number of acts of racism, and I want to make clear that we can be totally engaging in racism, whether or not we feel like we have a racist intent. A lot of people want to try and judge an action based on someone's intent, and intent is largely irrelevant. Jenny experienced those acts of racism regardless of what someone intended. So I just want to make that clear to begin with. Most of the acts of racism that I have engaged in have been microaggressions, which means it doesn't refer to the bigness or seriousness, but rather to the fact that these are interpersonal. So I said something I shouldn't have said. I asked an obnoxious question like, "Where are you from?" But really, and those are sort of the sorts of racist actions. I also want to say that I've also engaged in acts of racism, which is possible when there are no people of color present, as a Sunday school teacher in my Mormon congregation, really just kind of teaching their curriculum that God is white, that Jesus is white, that where I was teaching concepts that really privileged whiteness with regard to the identities of deity. And I would also want to call that out as racism that I've participated in.
Thank you, Nancy. Harold?
I chose to go back in my history to share my first experience with racism. And it goes back to when I started kindergarten. I was 5 years old. 1954. Yeah, I know that to some of you that's almost like BC, but it was the same year that the US Supreme Court declared that laws enacted for the purpose of racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. Prior to that time, that ruling, more than half of the states in this country had laws on the books segregating schools. My family lived in Kansas at the time, and we lived in a predominantly Black neighborhood, and all the Black kids went to segregated school. And so when this court decision happened, it was a pretty big topic among parents about where to send their kids to. Do we keep sending them to the segregated school, or do we switch and send them to the school in the white neighborhood in another part of town? And I remember my parents having some pretty long discussions that seemed to be at times just debates almost and arguments about it with other parents. They decided to enroll me in the school in the white neighborhood because I think they believed that I would have better educational opportunities there. You know, I don't know whether that was true or not because I never got to go to the Black school. That was the first time that I can recall that I became aware the skin color made a difference. I didn't know why it made a difference, but I knew it made a difference to my parents. It wasn't important to me because I just wanted to attend school with my friends, the school in my neighborhood. And I remember the first few days that my mother took me into school, I actually cried most of the time because I didn't want to be there. But fortunately, the teacher there understood my distress and my unease, and she gave me a lot of attention to help me adjust. So that first year, once I got used to it, I still think of her as one of the best teachers I ever had. But my parents knew something that I didn't know at the time, and that is that there was inequity in the school system, in the education system, and they did what they believed was the best option for my education. Now, I share this story with you because I want you to remember that kids, young people, they begin to learn early about racist ideas. They pick up on things that adults would become accustomed to acting a certain way, saying things may not be aware of. I was aware of how my parents felt, how skin color made a difference. And as time went on, it became more and more evident to me why it did. You may not know that the schools today still remain widely segregated, despite the Supreme Court's ruling. There was a report from the Economic Policy Institute, which is a think tank in Washington, that concluded that low-income Black children are more racially and socioeconomically isolated than at any time since the 1980s. Many civil rights advocates point to what they say is a resegregation trend. And racial inequity in public schools continues to have a harmful effect on the social and economic status of Black and brown students. another example of that system of racism at work.
Thank you, Harold. Mary?
Yeah, I totally can relate to everything that's been said. My first incident of like experiencing racism was also in kindergarten. I'm born in '69, so it was early '70s, and I remember going to a fish farm, and we were all fishing. You know, several of the other little kids and people were catching their fish, and there was one particular boy that I kind of had eyes for, and I remember his name was Bobby Wadley, and I was like, oh my gosh, you know, I like Bobby Wadley or whatever. I don't know why I was thinking about that in kindergarten, but anyway, or it was like preschool even. It wasn't even kindergarten. And anyway, so I was like, oh, you know, that's my boyfriend or whatever. And he was like, yeah. And then I remember one of his friends, which I also remember that kid, his name was John John. And he was like, you can't be his girlfriend. You're a nigger. And I was like, I didn't even know what that meant. So it was like, it wasn't traumatizing in the moment. But I remember going home to my mom and dad and being like, okay, what is that? And, you know, I knew it was some kind of othering, but I didn't understand, you know, at that point. And, you know, there's been other incidences, you know, which you guys, you know, kind of alluded to, you know, clearly I'm very fair complected. So a lot of my experiences are relayed to me through my family members. My dad definitely experienced 10 times what I've experienced. And I'm still very aware of that as a very fair skinned Black woman. But, you know, I've experienced it in work and stuff like that, where you can clearly tell that people don't think you're as smart as them. You're still not really getting promoted. You know, there are just, it seems like instances where, you know, mostly it's like questioning yourself and being like, okay, are they doing that because is this what I think it is? You know, and then it's like, oh yeah, that's what it is. So a lot of those types of incidents for me.
Thanks, Mary. So, Harold, you talked just a little bit about the educational system, and you helped us a little bit in the beginning with your definition of focusing on some systemic racism and the idea of racist ideas plus racist policies, which I thought was a really helpful way of looking at this. Could you go into maybe just a little bit more depth? I'll put you on the spot here a little bit. What is it that makes the educational system inequitable for persons of color from a systemic standpoint? What is it that's happening there that's making it inequitable?
Well, I think there's a number of factors that play into that outcome. One is the fact that a lot of schools that are predominantly Black are in metropolitan urban areas. And many of those areas and communities where those schools are lack resources. A lot of times there's been a moving out of the businesses, and the property values have declined, and there's not the income level to support higher standards, hiring better teachers, having the kind of technology and the different resources that schools have that are more affluent. So that's one thing. It's just a economic issue that plays into that. I think there's also an expectation in a lot of cases that it doesn't matter if these kids don't achieve. We'll just pass them along, keep them moving through the system, and send them out the door with a diploma. There's not the same investment in those kids a lot of times. clearly I'm making generalizations here, but across the broad public education system, a lot of times there's just not enough attention given to those kids, supporting them in whatever way they need, encouraging them, and making sure that they are learning at a rate that is going to allow them to achieve and stay at the grade levels that they should be in. Of course, with a lot of the Hispanic population, you may have language where they're actually have to catch up on the language because they may not, English may be actually their second language. I worked as a volunteer in a SMART program, a reading program for the last 4 years in a elementary school here in Hillsborough that was predominantly Hispanic and Latino children. And many of them, when they came into the program, first, second, third grade level, had very little ability to read in English. And one of the things that we were there to do was to try to make them more, and with learning in different ways and storytelling with them, getting them to respond to what they see on the page, even though they couldn't read the words. So there's a lot of different things at play there. But I think society in a lot of ways just has not been willing or focused or committed to addressing that gap. There has been progress made, and there's definitely studies that show there's ways to do better. But I don't think we've given it the attention and the focus and the resources it needs.
Thanks, Harold, for expanding on that a little bit for us.
Sure.
Nancy, I was interested in some of your comments about how our the way that we talk about our concept of God and you know, even our scriptures portray you know, a white bias, and that's certainly one way that we can perpetuate racism in the life of the church. I'm kind of asking this question broadly. Nancy, you're welcome to respond to it, but are there other ways that you have experienced racism in the life of the church? And anybody's free to respond to this.
Well, I don't want to hog the time or anything, so I'll just be real brief, because one of the things that I have pointed out in our congregation is, why do we have all these white pictures of Jesus on the wall? To me, that speaks to kind of an assumption that it's okay for us to assume that Jesus can be represented in this way, and nobody's going to think anything about it. Well, that conveys a sort of perception of Jesus, whether intentionally, as Nancy mentioned, or unintentionally. And I encourage all church buildings to take a look at that and see if there's a better way to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Harold. All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and move us on to our next question. It can be sometimes really challenging to engage in open and honest conversation about racism in America. And Nancy, I'm wondering if you could lead us out in exploring a little bit, why do you think so many white people are uncomfortable talking about racism?
So I grew up in the 80s, and I feel like as a kid in the 80s, I was taught, maybe explicitly, definitely implicitly, that we're not supposed to talk about race. that was like a very much an enforced thing. This is, we don't talk about this. And so it seemed like from a pretty early age, there was a taboo. And that left me being utterly incapable of having a conversation about race without feeling like I was doing something really wrong. And I feel like the message that I got, or the explanations I got for that kind of state of affairs, was that by talking about race, that is how we create racism, or like invite racism. And obviously these are very false ideas, but that's kind of what I absorbed from my environment. And I feel like to undo that is really to need to kind of sit with a group of people who are also committed to an anti-racist journey and say, okay, we're going to work our way through the awkwardness of this, the feeling like we shouldn't be doing this, and we're going to do it anyway. And that's something that I have a couple of classes where we talk about things like race and gender, and practice having these conversations is something we do, and I think that's really important.
Thank you, Nancy.
See, am I next on that, Ron?
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay. These are some difficult conversations. They're not easy. They make people uncomfortable. I was looking around for doing a little bit of background on the internet, looking for examples of people having conversations about race. And I think that Mary had a website that she referred to, and I think that Sean is going to put that up after our panel discussion. But where people are actually talking about race from a lot of different perspectives. But I think we just avoid it because it's not easy, it's not comfortable, it's difficult, and people don't do difficult, uncomfortable things unless they got a reason to do it. There's a higher goal that they have in mind. I once heard it explained that you don't go to the gym to be comfortable and do easy things. You know it's going to be difficult and uncomfortable a lot of times, but you go because you want to get better at something. I think also a lot of white people just don't have close relationships with people of other racial groups. Like I said, schools are becoming more segregated. We're segregated at church, we're segregated in our neighborhoods. There's just a lot of segregation in society in general that prevents a lot of interaction with race, especially at a deep enough level where you can actually get into some discussion about racism and racist ideas and so forth. So that's a couple of ideas I would share. I tell you, my family is interracial. My wife is white. And so I asked her this question, and I'm sure she doesn't mind if I share it, but she felt like a lot of times it's trust. There's a lack of trust between the two sides, whether or not people are going to feel like they're being judged for something they said, or they're going to be misunderstood. It's hard to have a difficult conversation with somebody that you don't have a trustful relationship with. So those are some factors I would throw out there.
Thanks, Harold. That's really helpful. Mary?
Okay, I'm chomping at the bit. Anyway, me and my son are over here having a conversation as well about some of his experiences that he just realized was racism. So the question that I had was why are so many white people uncomfortable talking about racism? And you can see I changed my screen picture there and put up a picture of my mom and dad. And so being biracial, it's not something that I really got to choose. I'm also a person in long-term recovery. I just celebrated 29 years of sobriety. And it's really been a part of my journey to, I have to be honest about who I am, where I come from, And I already was a person who, was fairly, I feel like, transparent. I'm a big talker, and I like to tell my opinion on things. And, that's sort of a blessing and a curse. But part of my recovery journey is that I need to be authentic, and I need to be honest, and I need to have my spiritual program, in place, and be doing the things that help me feel that, I would never have to turn back to drugs and alcohol. So, when it makes other people uncomfortable, of course that occurred in my own home with my mom. She was a really great champion for always searching out documentaries and things that we could watch together and learn about together. And I really miss that. And she would always find articles for me and different things like that. But sometimes the discussions were still really uncomfortable and really awkward. And her side of the family, which is from Minnesota, um, they were not really very supportive. I remember her parents, when my mom and dad got married, they, she told me they weren't thrilled, but it seemed as though once I came along, and they had a new grandbaby, that sort of, the story was that everything sort of ironed out. And I always felt loved and appreciated by my grandparents. But my mom's siblings are not so warm, especially now that I'm a grown woman. It was kind of fine when I was a little kid, but now they're not as warm, and we really have a hard time talking about any kind of race issues. So I think that that's also happened in my congregation at times, as I've been on this journey of learning and discovery and trying to figure out, where my place is as an educator, as a person who really seeks out these types of issues in curriculum, especially stuff around school. When my son was going to school, not only the curriculum issues, but who's on the teaching staff, and then the discipline issue always comes up when you talk about education, and then school to prison pipeline. There's just so many things that it's connected to. But really, for me, in my congregation, it's been an uncomfortable topic. And so I don't exactly understand why it's such an uncomfortable thing, but I think that word racism is part of it. It's such a strong word. It has so much stigma attached to it. And I really think the anti-racism term should also be used more interchangeably, because people just get so freaked out about anything. And a matter of fact, I even had an experience in the workplace where I made a comment to my employer during our yearly evaluation, and I said something about, my dad always told me I'd have to work a little bit harder being a person of color. And the next day, my boss called me into her office and she said, I'm going to need you to write a statement about what you said yesterday. And I had shared it with her because I was really comfortable with her. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, well, we probably need to make a report about that you feel racism here. And I was just like, what? And so like this whole process unfolded, and it was like, I never said I felt racism, but it made her uncomfortable. And so she felt like she needed to open up, some kind of process. So I think it's just really prickly for people. Very, very hard stuff to talk about. And again, it depends on the investment I have with the person. If it's somebody on the bus and I'm never going to see them again, I can decide, well, do I really want to, take this conversation on? But if it's somebody in my family or my congregation, it's somebody I'm going to have a long-term investment with, and I care about what they think.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. All right, Jenny, it's up to you. Go ahead and take a shot at this question.
No pressure, right? Well, I took the same cue that Harold did, and I asked this question to my partner, who's white. We've had this discussion before, so I knew his answer already, but thought he could help me organize the thought. And we think that it stems from the fact that white Americans have not been held responsible for their transgressions. Historically, I remember being in elementary school and remembering about the Pilgrims and the Indians, and we all got to dress up, and it wasn't a pretty picture. It was white colonizers coming in and committing genocide to people who were generous and welcoming to them. So this comes back to a systemic problem in education, that white people have not been taught their real history. They've been taught a completely washed out, surface level, candy coated history. And so were we. as a Black person, I'm still learning about Black American history because it just was left out of the curriculum. And so racism is hard to talk about because historically, white Americans have not been held responsible for their transgressions. So we're all taught the same thing at an early age. Racism is bad. So I can't be racist because I'm not bad. And then that turns what should be a discussion into somebody defending themselves. I am not bad. I am not racist. I have a Black friend. Like, I grew up poor. I can't be racist. It's denying. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. It's just holding yourself accountable is hard, period, no matter who you are. And now somebody who identifies as a good person is being told that they participate in something that's not good and that everybody universally knows is bad. It's easier just to deny it than talk about it.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, all these responses have been really insightful to this question. I remember having a conversation with someone who made the comment that, well, I have a Black neighbor that I say hello to when I pass them on the street. So I'm not racist. And Mary, I was interested in a comment that you made where you were drawing a distinction between being not racist and being anti-racist. I was wondering if you might want to expand on that a little bit for us. For those who are struggling with the word racism, and we want to almost immediately establish that we're not racist, that phrase, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what does it mean to be anti-racist?
Well, and I almost want to turn it to Nancy because she's the educator person, college educated, professor person. Yeah, so just like Harold had showed the book by Ibram Kendi, basically being anti-racist is actively doing things to counter racism or bias or discrimination. So it's just taking those actions to interrupt something when it's occurring, which can be very challenging. And a lot of times for me, it just actually involves getting the story behind whatever the offense is that's happening. So if somebody's offending me or they're saying something that's really like, wait a minute, don't say that. If I can just stop for a minute, take a breath and say, tell me more about that. Because usually there's a story behind there or there's a harm or something, and then they can tell you a little bit more about it. And I can usually come to some kind of shared understanding. But Nancy may have a little more on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
You did great, Mary. I mostly think of not racist as like white people wanting to hold racism at a distance. Oh, I'm not that bad thing, kind of going back to what Jenny was saying. And Robin DiAngelo in her book, White Fragility, has a really great chapter called The Good Bad Binary, which kind of describes exactly what Jenny was saying, where it's like, we have to believe we're good. And then we can't like accept feedback about ourselves that we're bad, or else we'll have to flip the switch and then we'll be bad. And so this creates such a problem. And so sometimes if someone was like, that was racist, we want to say, no, that can't be me. I'm going to hold that at a distance. And instead of engaging in the work to undo or to better understand or prevent myself from doing that thing again. So that's just what I want to add.
Yeah, and I just want to say, yeah, Jenny, you really said it eloquently, because it's really that pushing back. So I just wanted to support you in that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ron, I wanted to add just a comment about that too. I think one of the things that is helpful is for people in the conversation, whether you're on the side of, the Black person that is having a conversation with another white, or you're having an interracial conversation, let's put it that way. I realize that everybody is on this journey. We all have work to do, both on ourselves and in the broader context, the system that we function in. And there was a song from a Broadway play that went something like this, that kind of expresses this: everyone's a little bit racist sometimes. Look around and you will find no one's really colorblind. Maybe it's a fact we all should face. Everyone makes judgments based on race. And we all, I mean, I know I've lived enough around Black people enough to know I've heard racist ideas out of the mouths of Black people. They may not have power to inflict racist outcomes on people, but they still have racist ideas. I know because I have them myself sometimes. I think it's important that we all realize we all need to work together. We're in this together. So I just want to put that point out there. That's my view anyway.
No, thanks, Harold. I really appreciate that. We are all in this together and on this journey together. Well, today we celebrated Epiphany, the incarnation of God in Christ, in the visit of the Magi to the Christ child. And of course, they were not Jews, they were Gentiles, signaling the universality of God's love and peace for all people everywhere. Harold, we're going to toss this question to you to start out. How do you think the message and mission of Christ calls us to engage in the struggle against racism?
Yeah, well, I went back to what is often referred to as Christ's mission statement for this. And I'm going to quote that from the interpretation called The Message, and from the 4th chapter of Luke. God's Spirit is on me. He's chosen me to preach the message of good news to the poor, sent me to announce pardon to prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the burdened and the battered free, to announce this is God's year to act. And for the rest of his time on earth, he acted on those words. Now we know that Jesus was born into a system of rigid hierarchy, deeply ingrained inequities and injustice were common and accepted. What was Jesus's message to the people that perpetrated, that controlled, that had advantages in those systems? It was woe. It was a message of condemnation. God is not pleased. And he sent me to shake things up. My first church affiliation was at the H Street Baptist Church in Kansas City, Kansas. That's where I was first baptized. It was a predominantly Black church. And like most Black churches at that time, it was a cultural force. It gave people in the community a place of hope and comfort and dignity and community, a sense of community, striving, struggling together. And that really is a role that the Black church has played through centuries of the worst racism in America. And I've always thought that one of the things that made Christianity appealing to Blacks was they heard that message of Jesus, that God loves you. God is on your side. And just like he delivered the Israelites from their oppression in Egypt, God will deliver us too. We will overcome. And I think that message resonated in the hearts and the souls. And the Black church adopted that into its African roots of ways of celebration and community and so forth. And, you know, we have overcome a lot. I think I freely admit that a lot of the overt explicit racism of the past, we really have. We should be proud of that as a nation and as a people. And I think the church continues to have a role to play. I mean, often at their best, they have played that role. But too often they've been complicit in racist policies, racist inequity, even in our own church. If you go back and look at some of its early history, even in the community of Christ. So I'm hoping that, and I believe that our church is being led in the spirit and the mission of Christ to lock arms with people of all faiths and all races so that we can continue to bend that moral arc of the universe that Martin Luther King talked about towards justice.
Thank you, Harold. You can come preach in my congregation anytime. That was a powerful message of liberation. All right, so Mary, you get to follow that.
Okay, yeah, I gave some thought to this. To me, the message and mission of Christ calls us to be selfless, to focus on others first, and we must live by the teachings of inclusion. So I always just make it simple and say, I'm not my brother's keeper. I am my brother, or even better, I am my sister. And so, you know, like I remember when Trayvon Martin was killed and people started wearing hoodies and saying, you know, I am Trayvon Martin. And even President Obama gave that speech where he said, Trayvon could have been my son, or I could have been Trayvon. And I feel that deeply. I mean, it could have been me wearing a hoodie. Or when we see the signs that say, I can't breathe, you know, and I remember seeing Michael Brown and, you know, Eric Garner and those videos that were also so upsetting. And, you know, most recently, George Floyd, you know, rest in peace. But it's simply to be realizing that the portion of Christ's teachings that says we are to remember even the least of these is the portion we need to focus on. So I did try and find it. I think it's Matthew 25:31, where Jesus speaks to those in need and says the piece about, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And so those people, the least of these, they're me, you know. I'm very impressed with Reverend Barber. I do have his book right here. We Are Called to Be a Movement. And that's the shirt I have on. We Rise Together, the Poor People's Campaign. And I really feel that some of the core beliefs that we already have in our church, they are also expressing in that movement. And I just really feel that we are called to be a movement. And I have sought out those parts of the Doctrine and Covenants that talk about the saints of color, you know, and those times back in the 1800s, you know, that history specifically is very important for me to know and understand. And I hope that it also becomes, you know, just as important to the rest of the people in our denomination. Also, the book, The Invisible Saints, you know, really prolific writing around Blacks in the ministry in our church. Lots of history there.
Thanks, Mary. Those are really important reminders, particularly about some of our own history and becoming more aware of aspects of our history that we really don't know a whole lot about. All right, let's see, who do we have next here? I think Jenny, I think you're next.
I think so too.
All right.
So this question I actually struggled with. I didn't spend as much time with this as the others. I was like, I'll skip that and come back to it. But I do have a few things kind of piggybacking off of what Mary said. You know, Christ called us to be selfless and Christ called us to act and share each other's burdens, bear each other's sufferings. As a predominantly white denomination, I mean, maybe we need to take a step back and be like, where are all the Black people? I think that Christ's message and mission calls us to engage in that struggle and to look ourselves in the eyes and force ourselves through the discomfort to grow together and to grow our congregations. Whether that means doing more outreach. I know this isn't really the best time, but there are ways, you know, people are getting creative during COVID times and ways to share and benefit their community. And the Black struggle needs to be the community of Christ struggle. We need to, the church as a whole.
Thank you, Jenny. Nancy, you have some thoughts about this question? I have a feeling that you do.
I mean, I think all the good stuff has been said, and I think that, you know, as everybody else has said, liberation theology, you know, teaches us that, you know, Christ was in solidarity with the poor and the marginalized, and if we look at our community and society today, Christ would be in solidarity with the poor and the marginalized, and I think we need to think. You know, I think that that's a great starting point, and I think that's exactly what Harold and Mary and Jenny said. So I'm not sure I have much to add.
All right, thanks, Nancy. Yeah, I really appreciated the question that you raised for us, Harold. What was Jesus' message to those who are marginalized and oppressed? I think if we could continue to ask ourselves that question, it would lead us right into the heart of Christ's message and mission.
Ron, you're muted.
Thank you. It's not really good on my end. So with our final question, I'm going to ask our panelists to do something probably a little bit difficult, because this last question is a great question, and we actually could have spent our whole time just on this question. But I'm going to ask each of you to respond in just a couple sentences with just one thing that you would suggest as a starting place to help dismantle racism. Just a couple sentences, just where you would begin. I know that each of you have lots of ideas about things we can do, but I'm going to ask you to just kind of maybe pick one place that you would start to help dismantle racism. So we're going to begin with Jenny and invite her to respond to that question.
All right. You're right. I could give a whole TED Talk series on how to dismantle racism. But I thought that since we're speaking with individuals who took time out of their Sunday, I would start with you on an individual basis. Wherever you are, this is something you can do. Seek truth. There's wisdom in the truth, and from wisdom comes compassion. And only once you accept the truth of your transgressions, your ancestors' transgressions, the truth of Black people being afraid to leave their homes, can't drive to work without looking too suspicious, can't do anything. Know these truths. Don't deny these truths. Don't make excuses for these truths. Know them and learn from them. So once you know the truth, you can grow your personal wisdom of the world around you. Listen. If you're talking too loud, you can't listen. If you're defending yourself, saying you're not racist, you're not listening. So listen and accept instead of making an excuse.
Thanks, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy.
So in building on what Jenny just said, I think we need to engage, and you know, expanding on that, I think we need to engage in critical self-reflection about where we have gone wrong here. Where we need to ask ourselves where and when have I been racist? And you know, education, you know, and learning can help with that critical reflection and highlights some of those problems. But until we can do that, we're not going to make a lot of progress. I do think it is helpful for white people to start from the position of I am racist, and then to say, and then because then we're not holding it at a distance, right? And then we're saying, okay, this is the air I breathe, this is the world I live in. I have to see the truth of this thing. And I think that when someone modeled that for me, that really changed things for me, and helped me make more progress on my own anti-racist journey.
Thanks, Nancy. Okay, Harold.
Well, I thought the World Church had a pretty good guide online about establishing a local diversity team where you can build relationships at the local level, where you can build trust. You can, I think it's naive to think you can talk about these things meaningfully without building some trust and respect among the people that are talking about it. Well, there is a resource online for creating a diversity team. If you just look around at the people that you interact with every day and the people that are in your sphere, how diverse is it? Okay, this diversity team's a way to expand that. So look that up.
Thanks, Harold. All right, Mary.
Well, one thing is really, 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 really hard. Okay, one suggestion is hard, but I will say intentionally go out of your way overall, like the place to start, intentionally talk to that person who's the person of color or the minority in your group. Okay, check in with them, see how they're doing, how are they making it. Intentionally watch Black movies, documentaries, go to museums, read books. There's tons of information out there. Okay, be intentional. Patronize Black businesses. Pay attention to holidays that are not your holidays. I have this flag right here. This is because I marched with some indigenous workers at Dairy Gold because they were protesting some stuff. So get involved, get out of your own bubble. And I know we have to be careful with COVID, but look, there's lots of trainings and stuff going on online, okay? So don't make any excuses. Get going, get active. It's time, okay? So pay attention and, all kind of groups, elders, the deaf, people who are disabled. There's all kinds of vulnerable population, children, okay? But challenge yourself. And the last thing I would say is be consistent. So when we say intentional and consistent, we mean do something like this again. This is not the one time the church should do this. We need to consistently do this, maybe every year, maybe once a month, maybe once a quarter, however that might look. I hope that the conversation doesn't stop here. And last of all, I want to say when George Floyd was murdered, Steve Veazey posted on YouTube, for all the Midwesterners, especially the Missourians, I wrote a little reply. Get at me. Read the reply. Tell me what you think. Get back to me. Because we got a little town called Kinloch in Missouri that has some challenges, but we could do it. And then last but not least, don't do it alone. We do it together. We do it shoulder to shoulder. This is hard work. Don't try and do it all by yourself. Let's go together. Let's struggle together, people. That's what we are. We're supposed to be a movement. So let's just support each other. And a lot of us will feel a whole lot better if we just see you being intentional about helping out. God bless.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for some great places for us to get started and to really to remember that we are on this journey together. It is a challenging journey. It's going to take courage and persistence, but we can help each other along the way, support each other, and encourage each other. So we have time for a few questions, and hopefully some of you maybe have not been so absorbed in what has been a great conversation this evening that hopefully you've also been sending a few questions to Brenda Sargent, who is going to help us this evening. And so Brenda, I'm hoping you've received a question or two. Do you have a question for us to begin with this evening?
I do. And first, a few people have sent comments, and because of the time, we're going to focus just on the questions, but thank you for your comments. I've enjoyed reading them. The first one comes from Jennifer Wickstrom. Our conversation is focused on America, and she's, is concerned we're an international church. What does this look like at the international level, and what can we do to make the best situation possible?
Okay, thank you. Who'd like to take a shot at that question? Yes, Mary.
I just want to say the part about, when we have World Conference and how beautiful and diverse and how loving, I've had wonderful experiences there. And at the same time, my son had a not so great experience there, being a man of color, a young man of color. But I do just want to acknowledge that we do have such a global, the experts are right there. We just have to tap into them. And it's just, our church is a worldwide global church, and we have so much hope that all we got to do is tap into our experts that are already out there.
Thank you, Mary. Anybody else want to respond to that question?
I was just going to say, I know a lot of my responses, I was saying white Americans, but that's because in this conversation, the Black experience is different in America than it is in Canada. Or, I mean, racism is everywhere, don't get me wrong, but Black existence in America is founded on slavery. We were brought here in chains against our will, heads shaved, identities stripped away, and that happened in America. So the world church, we're all preaching love, peace, and acceptance and justice for the poor and impoverished. But this conversation is just a touch different here because of how this country was founded.
Yes, very much so. Thanks, Jenny, for that really important reminder. Brenda, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and give us another question here so we have a chance to get to as many as we can.
Okay, this one's from Judith Nelson. She asks the panelists, do you feel wary of each white person that you don't know well, perhaps fearing racism could lash out at unexpected times?
From my personal perspective, no. I think to some extent, like one of the storytellers said, you develop antenna for when a situation is threatening. You're just sensitive to those things, but no, I don't walk around thinking, some racist might jump out of the bushes while I'm walking down the street or something. No, but my antenna are always up, and I know when a situation is uncomfortable to me. And I think that probably is something that most white people don't experience. I think the storytellers were kind of talking about that, how you have to carry yourself a little bit differently. If I'm walking in a very nice all-white neighborhood, I tend to be more clued in, tuned into what's going on and what's around me than I might be if I was, at home in my neighborhood back in Kansas City or something. So I would say just no, but you do have this sensitivity to what's going on around you.
And just piggybacking off of that, it's hard, like I said, being Black in America is different than being Black anywhere else. My unique experience in America as a Black person, I was raised by a white family, not exposed too much to my Black culture or Black side of my family. And so for me personally, I spent a lot of my life feeling more comfortable around white people than Black people, just because that's what I was exposed to, until the world reminded me, guess what, you're Black. And we're gonna find all these prejudices that your white bubble didn't tell you about, I guess. But I've been, constantly in this conversation, and I was telling one of my coworkers the other day that being Black in America is similar to a quote that my football coach always said. He would say, "Now keep your head on a swivel, but keep your eye on the game. Don't don't lose focus on the game. So being Black in America is remembering, if I go to rural America or a rich white neighborhood, I'm going to keep my head on a swivel, but I'm just going to keep playing the game.
Yeah, and I would just
Yeah.
add just one
Go
quick
ahead.
addition, just one real quick addition. Based on what's happened in the last couple of days in Washington, D.C., I'm more concerned about it than I have been prior to that. I will tell you that for sure.
Yeah. There's a term called code switching. And I don't know if any of you guys saw Chappelle's monologue. They replayed it last night on Saturday Night Live, but he alluded to that. The fact that, we're very, very adept as people of color at figuring out and composing ourselves to different situations. And unfortunately, we spend a lot of energy doing that. And it became really apparent to me it was about a year ago when Nathaniel and we had went to, it was a church event, and we went there with my mom. It was before she had got ill. And it was like, she just goes in the room and she just beats herself. She's able to and Nathaniel and I are much more likely to hang back and kind of see who's in the room. And, we're really, really adept at observing the social cues and seeing how much of ourselves we can be. So it's a very highly developed sense of, yeah, you got to really keep your head on a swivel. That's a good metaphor.
Brenda, let's see if we can maybe squeeze in one more question.
Okay, this one comes from Susan Oxley, and this was in relation to the education discussion. What are the systemic decisions that contribute to resegregation in schools?
I can really speak to that just because I was bused and I went to all white schools, and like Harold. And my mom really wanted me to have those experiences because all the arts and stuff were at the white schools. And so I was bused. And busing was always like a positive thing in our family. But I realized as an adult, like, what would my experiences have been like if I had been able to go to a majority Black school or even a Black college? So it's like, it really does affect the education, it really does.
Mm-hmm.
There's a podcast called Nice White Parents, which really goes quite in depth into this issue and talks about how white parents make a lot of choices, like profess that they want their children in multiracial schools and then end up not sending them there. And that really does a good job of highlighting and going into more depth into this particular question with regard to segregation in education.
I also just took a training, and I can try and get Sean the link, but I just took a training called How to Raise Anti-Racist White Children. And they pointed out a lot of really, really interesting things about curriculum and how to talk appropriately to kids about the different things, like right now with everything that's happened at the Capitol, how to be age appropriate, but be honest. And so there are a lot of tools out there.
All right. Well, I really want to express appreciation for the insights, and not just the insights, but just the openness that Jenny and Nancy, Mary, and Harold have been willing to share with us this evening. I'm just thank you for your preparation for this evening, and also for just the additional depth I feel that I feel I personally have, and I believe we all have, as we continue our conversation about how we can become anti-racist. Coming together in community with open hearts and open minds is the beginning of real change. I approached our conversation this evening, and I approach every conversation with this pivotal insight. I don't see things as they really are, and I need others to help me see more clearly. As much as I try, I am always limited by my personal experience as a white, male, middle-class Christian. The power of coming together in community, inviting those who may look different and think different, is in the opportunity to approach conversation not as competition, but a genuine opportunity to learn, driven by a holy curiosity for the truth, wherever it may lead. I hope that we as individuals and community will continue the difficult work of uncovering assumptions, preconceived biases, and other barriers that may make it difficult at times to perceive and fully own our part in perpetuating racism in all its hidden and not so hidden forms. I hope many more of us will step forward and, in the words of one of my favorite authors, Margaret Wheatley, let go of our judgments, become curious about each other, and take the risk to begin a conversation. I believe our power to make a difference is much more significant than we dare understand. In the words of representative and civil rights legend John Lewis, nothing can stop the power of a committed and determined people to make a difference in our society. Why? Because human beings are the most dynamic link to the divine on this planet. May we live fully into our potential, is my prayer.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let us resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the day that hope unborn has died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place on which our Father sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood and the slaughter. Out from the gloomy past till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on our way, thou who hast by thy might led us unto the light, keep us forever in, we pray. Least our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Least our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath the hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. Thank you, guys. God bless.
God bless you, Seclinda.
I invite you now to join me in prayer. God of comfort and of creation, keeper of knowledge and source of all mystery, thank you for this opportunity to gather here this evening from all of our various locations and time zones, from our busy lives, our distractions, and our agendas. We have gathered this evening as brothers and sisters, friends, strangers, and disciples. We have come here with a desire to learn, to understand how injustice happens and what it feels like, and to share stories and experiences that might help us work to end those injustices that are based in racism. As we enter into this journey of exploration and education, open our eyes both to the obvious examples of injustice as well as to those that may not be so obvious. Open our ears to the words, spoken and unspoken, that bring harm to others and therefore to ourselves as well. Open our hearts to the awareness and realization that many of us have been complacent and even complicit in our silence and inaction. Loving God, as we commit to furthering our understanding of racial injustice and to continuing these conversations, we also acknowledge that our community is built on being vulnerable enough to share our stories, to finding connection with one another, and to listening with our hearts as well as with our ears. Let us not be distracted in this endeavor by the next headline or the latest trends or tragedies, but let us embrace our responsibility as fellow travelers on this earth to love one another, even as your Son, Jesus Christ, commanded us and, more importantly, modeled for us. Give us strength for the journey ahead, as difficult as it is, compassion for those journeying with us, as well as for those not yet on this journey, for we are all struggling with these difficult issues. Bless us with the assurance of your presence with us, your guidance before us, and your love for all of us. We ask for these blessings in the name of the peaceful one, your Son, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen. What an evening. I am so thankful for those of you that served on the panel, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your experience. As somebody who's on here messaged me for sharing your truth tonight. There were several comments that were sent to me because they couldn't share in the public chat, so they shared it with me, and so I'll just pass that on, that there's your response tonight, your sharing was so appreciated and well received by folks here. Ron, thank you for moderating this conversation as well, and to those that are storytellers from earlier in the program tonight. What again, the vulnerability and the stories that you were willing to share with us. Words cannot express the gratitude that I have for your willingness to do so. But thank you. And to all others who participated in providing ministry this evening. I want to, we're going to share some announcements about what's coming up the rest of the week. And also I put that link for the resources in the chat earlier in the program. That is where you can go to sign up. The resources that you heard tonight, as well as others that have been shared by people involved before this, that will be communicated later on once we get that all together and ready to share. So I would encourage you to sign up for that if you want to receive that. I want to just, two things I want to leave with before I do the announcements. One is that I am captured by a quote. I'm a quote person. And so Jenny, I'm going to quote you. The Black struggle needs to be the community of Christ struggle. So I'm captured by that quote that I want to share as part of Ascending Forth. Also, my favorite, one of my favorite public theologians, as many who know me know, is Nadia Bolz-Weber. And today, as part of her Sunday prayer, she offered this, and I'm just going to read the part that to me is what we need to hear tonight. God, you once tore open the heavens and descended as a dove upon Jesus and a dirty river full of repentant people. I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but now would be a good time to tear open the heaven and send that dove down again. Send your Holy Spirit to stir up repentance in your people who only manage to point to others and never ourselves, and are maybe a tiny bit grateful for the obvious overt racism, violence, and xenophobia of others, since it conveniently takes the spotlight off of our own. I pray that you send your Holy Spirit to comfort your people who literally or figuratively find themselves yet again sweeping up the detritus of others' racism, violence, and ignorance. Send down that dove, Lord, but help us look to the needs of our neighbor and not to escape the hatch of heaven to find her. Amen. I'm going to pull up a couple of slides to visually share these announcements. Okay. So on Wednesday night, we would invite those that would like to come back for what we call Faith and Formation in our Mission Center. It's a Wednesday night opportunity for gathering, for discussion, and to learn more. And so, God of our weary years and God of our silent tears, from 7 to 8:15 Pacific time. So make sure that you translate that to whatever time it is in your area. We're going to watch a TheoEd talk from Austin Channing Brown called The Double-Sided Pursuit of Racial Justice, a powerful, eye-opening TheoEd talk that she provides. So we'll discuss that, and then we're going to have a Storytellers moment with Sue Ann Allen, a white mother from Seattle who raised her mixed son there, and what that was like, and will share with us, and we look forward to that, and we'll have a Q&A with her and discussion as well. So that'll be Wednesday night. Next Sunday morning, we're going to have a Sunday school type experience with Nancy Ross will be back with us for Facing the Rising Sun, a class on coming to terms with white privilege, as we read and discuss Peggy McIntosh's essay, White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Again, that will be 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific time next week and next Sunday. And then we'll have our Racial Justice Sunday worship, and Ron will be back to share the message for that service, and a Storytellers moment from Harvey Hawks and some other many other individuals who will participate in that worship experience. That'll begin preludes at 10:40 a.m. Pacific time. The worship's at 10:45, and then that'll go actually till about noon, not the 11:45 time. It'll be a little bit longer next Sunday for that special worship experience. The links for all of these events will be posted on our Facebook page for the Greater Pacific Northwest USA Mission Center throughout the week, and we'll create events on there that have them. So that's a place you can go to. You can always contact me as well if you need that, if you need those links. Again, thank you all for joining us tonight, and the conversation is just beginning here with what we're providing. This is not, like has already been mentioned several times, just a one-time shot, and then we feel good about ourselves and we move on. This is us committing to the work that is before us, the hard work but necessary work. So let us work together, as was mentioned during the panel conversation as well.